The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and thanks for joining us today for this short webinar about migrating to cloud, migrating to Jira Cloud. Myself and Chris Bland, that's my name. I'm one of the founders of BDQ.cloud. We're a gold partner in the UK. And Igor Potrusaev, one of my colleagues, who's a very experienced consultant and has led many of our migration efforts. We're just going to run through a short presentation today about Jira Cloud, what it is, what the time frame for server licenses, the sale thereof stopping is going to be, and some lessons we've learned about doing migrations. So without further ado, let's move on. Bit about us. We are a gold partner based in the UK. We've done a lot of migrations, anything from household names with thousands of users, as well as SMEs. Now, Jira, JSD, and Confluence are often critical systems. Even SME, may well have years of important data that they want to retain, basically. They may be switching, for example, service desks. They may need to provide seamless service to their customers. Development teams can't afford long downtime, or if you're dealing with enterprises, they may well have 1,000 people using the existing system, and those people are going to turn up on a Monday and they're going to start work on a new system. So it's got to be done right. One of the takeaways here we find is all instances are very, very different, but each instance is very important to each customer, no matter the size. So we're going to talk a little bit about the agenda, differences between server and cloud for those of you who are unaware. It's particularly relevant if you're still on server and thinking about moving to cloud. The end of life announcement, I'm sure some of you will be aware of this, what the key dates are. Basically, Atlassian intend on becoming a cloud first company and are going to stop selling server licenses. And we're also going to talk about things you've got to look out for, and also a case study we recently did with one of our customers who we migrated. So firstly, a little bit about Atlassian Cloud for those of you who haven't yet tried it or wonder how it works. The products are in fact very, very different. The days when cloud was a hosted version of server are now long gone. Jira Cloud is in fact a completely different implementation, actually. There is data portability between the two, but the cloud platform and the associated apps are implemented completely differently and the architecture is different. Different doesn't mean worse. In fact, far from it. Cloud has improved and improved. Atlassian have invested an enormous amount of resource into it, and now we've got some very large enterprise customers using cloud very effectively. There are a few differences between the platforms, though, which we are going to cover at a high level. But they are putting more and more resource into it to make it enterprise ready, and some of the later features, such as whitelisting data sovereignty, definitely make it a viable choice. One of our customers, Clark's, has been using cloud for years now, very successfully. In fact, they basically started on it, and one of our other customers, who's a household name insurer, has moved over to it and is now approaching about 2,000 users, and they were previously using server on AWS. Again, it's very effective and everything's working. So it really is becoming, or it's a viable choice for the enterprise. Okay. A couple of little differences about it, and this just really highlights some of the things you look for. When you migrate from server to cloud, your users will get a slightly different experience when they log in. For example, this is the new homepage you see, which will pull together your work. You can see recent projects, issues you recently interacted with, and it is a good starting point, especially for new users who want to just log in and continue where they left off. So Atlassian really are pulling out all the stops to try and make it as easy as possible to use. And this is where all their effort is going. Another little example here. On the left-hand side, we've got the old server issue. on the right-hand side, we've got the new cloud-based issue. As you can see, the new view is actually a lot cleaner, and everything is still here, but there are just a few little differences. For example, the custom fields are hidden on the right. Users have to open them up and pin ones they use frequently. So it is a cleaner view. It's less intimidating for new users, but there are a few little differences, and especially if your users are really used to using the old view, they may find this one take a little bit of getting used to initially. And this is all part of dealing with the migration, really making sure the communication is good and everyone understands what they're getting.
Yeah, from our experience, it's really important to run some trainings to show this difference, especially if you have to work with Jira every day, and even smaller changes may affect your work and how effectively you're working. So it's really important to run some preparation trainings, maybe create some slides and extra documentation for your users to make sure they can work properly and do not stuck with new improved interface.
Yeah, absolutely. And the more users you've got, obviously, the more important that is, because the effects can be, greater. There are also two different project types with cloud. There are classic, which is what you would be used to as the normal project in Jira Server, which is what we'd call the traditional one. All the schemes can be shared. It's arguably trickier to config. There are a lot of options available, but it does enable you to sort of create quite a sophisticated shared setup where many projects all share the same configurations and can be therefore easily managed in one place. However, that can be a bit much for some people, and there is the idea now of next gen projects in cloud. These are a good choice when you've got teams that want to self-administer. It's got fewer features for configuration, but that is increasing as we speak, and each project basically has its own settings. So if you want to centrally administer projects, next gen isn't such a good choice. If you want your teams just to be able to manage their own projects and not affect anybody else, then next gen projects are definitely worth looking into. One thing to note here is that you can't migrate next gen projects back into Server. The concept simply doesn't exist inside Server. And if you wanted to move a cloud back into Server, you would have to migrate your next gen projects into classic projects basically within cloud, and then take that export and move that back to Server first. Okay, so a small note, but cloud has now it's giving you perhaps the best of both worlds, if you like. The original type of project, which is very controllable, and you can administer many projects in a consistent way, or you can have projects which are easy for small teams to deal with by themselves. So those were, that concludes actually just some very high level view of some of the differences between cloud and server. The architecture is different. It's got new features in it which didn't previously exist, and apps are different as well. And this is why there's not necessarily an easily corresponding migration path from one app to another, because they are completely different. There's a recent announcement which many of you may be aware of, I suppose, making the need to migrate more urgent, potentially. Atlassian's strategy is now firmly cloud first, and actually they're going to stop selling server licenses. If you wish to continue with an on-prem product, you'll need to have DC data center, and data center tiers start at around 500. So it is more expensive. Really, their view is that cloud is really the starting point for all new customers, and their goal is to be a cloud first company. Okay, so the need to migrate is probably getting more pressing unless you have very, very good reasons to stay on sort of an on-prem solution, and then it'll have to be DC, typically around data sovereignty, or if your data is extremely sensitive and you want to manage it all locally. So timetable, some dates in your diary, 2nd of February 2021, so not long now, new server licenses will no longer be sold. and also the pricing for your existing server licenses will start to increase, as will data center prices increase as well. Don't know what those increases will be, but they've given notice that's going to happen. 2nd of February 2022, you won't be able to any longer upgrade and downgrade tiers on your existing server platforms. So again, if you're wanting to do that to give yourself a good run out to the end, it'd be advisable to do it before that date. 2023, it won't actually be possible to buy new apps for server anymore, even for the licenses you currently have. Finally, in 2024, maintenance and bug fixes will no longer be available. So that'll be the end of its service life. So that is probably the final point. If you're mandated to use a supported solution with your organization, that by that time you'll really have needed to move to cloud. So with all that, bear in mind, what we're now going to talk to you about a little bit is about the action of migrating from one to the other, things you need to look at, and actually where you can get supporting material from. Now, Atlassian's Cloud Migration Center has got a really large amount of really useful information. You can also get free cloud migration trials. It used to be the case that you could only really evaluate cloud for quite a short period of time, but that simply doesn't work for large customers that need longer to work out all the kinks and may have it's quite a sophisticated setup. So your free cloud migration trials now can go on to, I think the last thing was like maybe even up to 12 months. So they really are keen on trying to support people to move on to cloud, and that is certainly worth looking at if you're thinking about doing it. So take a look at the Cloud Migration Center. Just Google that or Google Atlassian Migration Cloud, and that's the jump off point for a lot of really useful information. There's a migration guide in there which has Atlassian's best practices for how to do a migration, which can be very helpful. There's Atlassian's Migration Assistant, which is generally a very good way of, it's certainly the easiest way of migrating data from server to cloud. This comes in the form of a server add-on that you have to install in your server instance, and then it can move up individuals, it can move single projects, which is nice, and you can choose your users. However, it doesn't migrate everything. Previously it didn't migrate boards. It now does migrate boards which are linked to a single project, doesn't migrate all custom fields, doesn't migrate service desk. It's 7.6 onwards only. So one of the issues we'll talk about planning these migration projects is you do need to evaluate what you've currently got and then determine what the best strategy is for actually doing the migration. Okay. We're just putting our own small add-on on the marketplace. There's various stats that we ask for or generate when we're helping customers migrate. For example, duplicate emails and so forth. You can't have duplicate emails when you're migrating to cloud, for example. So we're just putting that on the marketplace at the moment. It's going through approval right now as a service to the community. So yeah, if you want to get a series of stats which give you an idea of how big the instance is and where some of the problems might be, just grab that. You might find it useful. Igor, I think you've well, you're quite familiar with the migration assistant, aren't you? And
yeah, so in terms of Jira Cloud Migration Assistant, it's a free tool, first of all. So it's help you to migrate your data to cloud. But as Chris mentioned, it's quite limited and cannot move everything as is. So you have to try and check if all your required data is moved across. They constantly update this app, and it's become more stable and more useful. So in some cases, especially if you have small instance and you know what won't be migrated, it could be useful to use Migration Assistant and then manually move some boards configuration and some custom fields. But for huge instances, it could be tricky to use Migration Assistant because it won't migrate a lot of stuff, and you have to do a lot of manual work. So you need to analyze what data do you have, what is critical for you. Is it fine for you to not migrate everything? Maybe it could be fine in some cases. So yeah, there is hard to say until you analyze all your instance, analyze all your data, and how your users work in Jira.
Every instance is different.
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, from our experience, even smaller instance with just a few service desk users, but with a huge amount of customers, may have quite complicated configuration, and it could be tricky to use Migration Assistant at all. So you will have to use manual migration with XML data migration, and but on the other hand, there are some quite vanilla configurations of big Jira instances, and Migration Assistant may help with it and move almost everything. So, yeah.
So it's not really a question of sort of how large, is it? It's more of a question of how vanilla is your instance.
Yeah. What is your configuration? How many modifications? How many customizations? How your workflow custom fields configured, and how many boards and how your boards configured. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's available on the store as a free add-on. Just look for the Jira Cloud Migration Assistant, and it's very useful. It can be a useful tool. In terms of saying what gets migrated with the Jira Cloud Assistant, there is a page of documentation about that. Now, there's a long list of what gets migrated, far too long for this slide, actually. So this is not an exhaustive list on the slide. You need to go and look at it, and it keeps changing all the time. Keep an eye on it. But this page in the documentation will give you a detailed view of what is migrated and what doesn't get migrated. Okay, there's no point us running through this on this slide. As I say, it's always changing. You just need to be aware of it when you're doing your migrations. So you know what's going to come across with it. Our own little tool is there are a few things it's useful to know about. For example, number of attachments, data volumes, duplicate emails, things we're always asking for, what the plugins are, number of versions, database versions, if using external user directories and so forth. So we're just currently putting this through for approval. We've just done it to make it easier to get statistics from instances. And you can save the output to JSON or CSV, either of which can go into Excel if you want to send it to maybe your internal technical staff or external partners. If you want us to give you a quote, by all means, upload this yourself. You can copy the JSON, and there'll be a page on our website that you can send it to, and it's described here. Or indeed, just use it. If you find it useful, just drop us a comment.
Yeah, the reason we created this add-on is because every customer we deal with, we always ask this information, and sometimes it's may take a time to find all this data from for customers. So we decided just to make our own life and our customers' life easier to compile all this information in one page. And yeah, it's helped us to understand what is possible problems, what is approximate data volume you have, and what could be tricky part to migrate. Oh, it's straightforward migration. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a combination of the system info page minus the bits that aren't so relevant, plus other bits that are more useful, which you can only really generate via SQL queries and so forth. So yeah, it should be called Jira BDQ Migration Analyst for Jira Cloud. It's free add-on, by the way. There's no cost, and it's going through approval now, so hopefully should be in the store pretty soon. We look at doing these in a couple of ways, and may be worth you considering this if you're doing your own. We tend to find that there's sort of an accelerated process for smaller instances or vanilla instances. As we said, no two instances are the same, and using an enterprise process for someone that's got a relatively vanilla instance is, not necessarily appropriate. So if we're helping someone do a migration, we'll try and assess initially what is most appropriate, and if it's the accelerated process, we can usually do a fixed price. So we'll assess the instance, basically run a trial migration to check for problems, provide this test instance for UAT. And that's really very, very important, because doing the trial migration, checks to see if there'll be any problems, to see what process will be most appropriate. It generates that UAT test instance so that your users can actually get oversight of it early and make sure it works exactly as they expect it to. As we noted earlier, there are differences between the two. And once everyone is satisfied with the UAT cloud instance, and that's signed off, then we can plan the go live, and we'll know how long it will actually take to do a migration and what interventions, if necessary, during that migration we are required to get it up and over. One of the things about doing an accelerated process is we're in control of the whole thing. So typically we'd ask for system administration access on your instance and then manage the whole process for you. It's like a slightly compressed version of Atlassian's best practice, basically. But it's something you can use yourself internally. Just be aware that discovery and scope is important, as is the test migration. You really don't want to do shortcuts with this, because as we've just mentioned, there is no guarantee necessarily that it'll just be a plug and play operation. Okay, and this Jira and Confluence are often used by so many people and are so important. It's got to be done right. The enterprise process we use is typically if there's more complicating factors, and again, this is something you might want to consider yourself. As I say, Atlassian's page has a really good set of material on best practices. But typically, if you've got larger instances and high data volumes, or you're working with many staff, so for example, we're not in control of it. In our case, we might be working with the staff at the customer, and there'll be a lot of coordination required. Maybe there's a high number of integrations or add-ons. You may find in some case you've got to evaluate that beforehand, because there may not be any equivalent add-ons for you in cloud, or if there are, there may not be a migration path for them. So we may need to de-scope them or understand exactly how that data is going to be migrated, which may require manual intervention. If you're doing SSO, single sign-on, perhaps you're using LDAP at the moment. Going forwards, that's not going to work. You're going to need Atlassian Access and SAML. There may well be a high number of users, so the UAT may have to involve many different representatives, all using different areas of the system. So this generating the test instance for UAT is really, really important, because if you're going to have a sort of 1,000 people sitting down one day and you starting to use it, you've got to make sure they've basically a representative number are happy with this before that occurs, and this is always something we would do.
Yeah, I think UAT may found not only some migration problem, but the difference between server and cloud. Even everything is migrated, but if you cannot find your dashboard or your board, it could be a problem for big companies.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you you may find under certain circumstances boards don't get migrated, for example. So this is part of running this test migration to make sure everything's gone across. Certainly say communication is really important. All stakeholders must be informed of dates and stages. Certainly data migration runbook, you generate that during the test migration to make sure you've got an accurate plan and know how long everything's going to take and what all the problems might be. And actually the project management for this is obviously really critical, as is collaboration. And we find actually standing up a dedicated like Confluence, Jira and Jira Service Management instance on cloud is really really helpful. You can just keep this up to 1, 2, 3 months, whatever's needed for the relevant people. You can use Confluence for the project docs. Jira, you can use it for the whole migration process and migration team tasks. And Jira Service Management actually can be really useful for getting UAT feedback. So let's say you're dealing with 50 or 100 people testing certain elements of the system. Unless you've got another mechanism for doing this, it actually works very well. You can have a request type whereby they log issues, or they can just send things in via email, and then you can actually triage them in the desk, and then you can link them back to actually tasks in the Jira project. So this can be a very effective way of getting something complex like this over the line.
Yeah, we used this process with a few customers and got really great feedback from customers because it's easy to, during UAT, send any bugs for us. We don't need to send a bunch of emails and resend it from one support team to other support team. So everything is centralized. We have, by the end of UAT, we have statistics, how many problems was found, what is the reason of these problems, is it something misconfigured, is it something not migrated, or it's just difference between server and cloud, and we need to provide additional training to people. So it's really a really useful tool during migration.
Absolutely, yeah. As I said, there's a very big difference between maybe an SME with say 25 staff and an enterprise with over 1,000. And it's very difficult to have one. It's not practical to have one process for both, in our opinion. A few gotchas. Duplicate emails are not allowed. So in Server, you can have duplicate emails, as in Server, the unique identifier for a user was the actual username. And you could have many usernames, couldn't you, with the one email?
Yeah, but in cloud, email is main identification for your user. So it has to be unique. And yeah, in server, basically, you may have not email at all, or you may have some example email or duplicates. So it's really important to check all your users and your emails before you start the migration.
Yeah, otherwise it will balk the load, basically. Our add-on lets you generate a report so you can see where they are. And many years ago, BDQ actually stands for Business Data Quality, and we actually did quite a lot of work in the data quality area. We did data profiling tools, so we are very familiar with the issues around data migration and the approach, and that's sort of reflected in the way we deal with cloud migrations. You should know that LDAP does not exist. Bear in mind, the cloud is a publicly available service, and it's on the public internet. So security is approached differently. If you want to continue using SSO, you'll need to use SAML, and you need to use Atlassian Access, and then you can attach this to a provider. Typical flavor would be Azure Active Directory, which might be hooked up with your own on-prem Active Directory instance, for example. But that is how you would need to deal with SSO, and this is one of the slightly more complicated areas. It all works very well, but you just need to plan and make sure it works. You should also consider managed accounts. These are Atlassian accounts in Atlassian's sort of global cloud user directory, but which you manage, having authenticated your domain. So in our case, bdq.cloud would be a domain. We would authenticate that Atlassian. Then all Atlassian accounts with the email ending bdq.cloud would be things that we could manage and deactivate. So this is one of the ways in which you actually manage the user accounts which are coming straight into your server, or your instance, I should say. Other things to keep an eye on-prem solutions can have a lot of data. If this is the case, you may want to consider using AWS for your migration server, as in move things to an AWS instance, do your testing there, and then you can use the very fast transfer rates of AWS to get it up to Atlassian Cloud. That can really speed things up. Not all server apps exist on cloud or have a migration path. If they do, you need to sort of get to the bottom of that early on as part of the analysis phase and scope this with your users, especially if something is being heavily used. If it's not, you may decide you want to remove it. So it's an element of app archaeology, but you need to get this done early as part of your migration. As we mentioned, the migration instance assistant does not cover all cases, including boards. You must check that beforehand, otherwise you could have a surprise. And you may find that everything just may work for you. It can still be that you have to edit the XML backup to move things across, which is, but fortunately now that is now a rarer event. But if you've got a more complex instance, it's just as well to have a text editor on hand which can deal with large data volumes and have it available where you're doing your test migrations. A few more things. Manage user expectations. Remember, cloud and server are not identical. Very similar. Cloud is better in many ways, but they're not the same. And nobody likes surprises. So it's best to lay the groundwork before, during, and after. That's where the UAT phase is so important. If using integrations, well, bear in mind that Atlassian runs on cloud is a public cloud service. So you need to check if your integrations will work. What interfaces are they using? The REST APIs actually aren't necessarily the same. And furthermore, they'll be on a public site. So if you're currently got something working via REST internal to your organization on your local network, it may well be that that is not going to be available or to work in the way you'd want using cloud. Okay, so we need to have a look at your integrations. When you're going to do the migration, let Atlassian support know it beforehand. They've got a dedicated migration team. They're really helpful in that regard, and they'll work to make sure the data moves across smoothly. The other little things, and there's a huge list of things one could go on and on, but whitelisting will need the premium version. And this basically means that you can choose the IP ranges that actually have access to your otherwise publicly available cloud system. And if you don't do this, theoretically data can get downloaded onto public machines. Somebody could go into an internet cafe, log onto your cloud instance, and then just download attachments, if they've got a valid login. And that might be the behavior you're happy with, but if you're not, if you want to keep control over the machines from which people can log in, you will need whitelisting, and whitelisting is part of the premium version, premium or enterprise. There's no choice per se about data sovereignty right now unless you get the enterprise edition, and you can then at least choose whether it's US or EU. And in summary, test, and test again. A little case study that we did. It's a sort of small plug for ourselves actually, but it's one of our customers recently who were kind enough to give us a case study. Aurora Commerce, they're highly technically proficient and they provide e-commerce solutions. They could have done a migration themselves technically, but they just decided not to, as it wasn't going to be a good use of their time. They actually had a look at how long it was going to take them internally, and after deciding that they'd have to spend a fair amount of time working out how to do this, and it would be a one-off process, they found the distraction and effort and time available wasn't going to be worth it, and it would actually be cheaper to have us do it. And that was after an internal comparison. In their case, we used our fixed price accelerated process. So we gave them a fixed price for doing the work after having looked at what they wanted to do. They had years of important data, actually, customers using their service desk, and that's how they support their customers and their agents and their partners. They've got internal developers using both Jira and Confluence, so it's a really important system, core to their whole business, so it had to be done well. We basically checked the stats first, actually, to ascertain that we could do a fixed price when we got engaged with them. We managed the whole process in this particular case. It was hosted on AWS, so we could actually take the data from there, and it was quite fast to move it up. And as discussed, we ran a test migration, got it UAT'd, and then once we knew exactly what was going to be required to move it across, we could go live at a pre-arranged time. So, they've very kind to give us a nice quote, and actually there's been no incidents at all since they went live. On another note, I asked them how they actually found cloud, and the MD said they really like it and they would not go back to server. One of the key benefits, apart from everything else, is they do not spend any of their time supporting the systems now. And previously there was like one person who knew how to sort of support the Jira application, and that was one of their really skilled technical staff. And it just wasn't a good use of his time at all. And now, if there are problems with a Jira or with any questions, they can just reach out to Atlassian support and get it rectified directly. If you want more more information on what we did, just have a read of the case study. It's on our website. It's quite short, but it's basically a full stack migration. So look, in summary here, all instances are different. You've got to read all the documentation thoroughly, understand what is in your instances, what the integrations are, if you're using SSO, what the plugins are you're using, where it's hosted, the implications of this as you move it to the public cloud, whether the migration assistant will work for you, or whether you're going to need a manual migration using the XML backup. You must test it. You must make sure your users need to know what they're going to get, so you've got to communicate and manage. As we've mentioned, if you would like us to help with that, we can certainly do that. Sometimes, and if we can, we'll give you a fixed price, typically if we can be in full control of the situation. And it will depend on the number of migrations and things within our control. By all means, grab our app from the App Store. Should be there within the next few days for some useful stats. If you want any more assistance, please just drop us an email or any advice, or take a look on our website. And hope you found it useful. If you're thinking about it, it's a great platform, Atlassian Cloud. And this is only a one-off event to get there, but just be aware it's not necessarily like upgrading Word or something where you can just click it and move. Depending on, each instance is different, and it varies wildly depending on what apps are installed and how it's being configured. And you just have to approach it with care, particularly if it's heavily used or there's years of data in it. Have you got any thoughts to add, Igor?
No, I think that's it. Maybe some questions.
No, there's no questions coming in. So on that note, we will basically terminate the session here. If you've got any questions, as I've noted, please get in touch with us, and have a really good day. Many thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.